Hello, this is Horror Studio 1, and this is my unedited podcast. Hello, this is Horror Studio 1, and this is my unedited podcast number 16. And I know a lot of you guys commented that when I say unedited, I say unedited. Unedited. Okay, unedited podcast number 16. And hello, everyone. It's a great day here in Canada right now. Sorry if I was pretty close to the mic. I'm super excited today. It's a great day, and it's a great day to make a podcast, and it's a great day to connect with all you fellas right here. So, just a few things I want to talk about before getting to the meat of the topic. That's what I do. I like to talk about shit before I get to, the title of the video. Click away if you don't like it. I'm kidding. Please don't go. Please don't leave. Anyways, so just a few stuff I want to talk about today. Unedited podcast number 16. I want to thank every single one of you guys again. I want you guys know I'm going to do these every day, Monday to Friday kind of thing. And my schedule was kind of messed up because I was in Vegas, baby. And then I didn't gamble. I didn't win any. I didn't lose any in it, basically. So thus, my schedule was kind of messed up there. But, I'm back on track now, baby. And, if you guys missed me, here is my podcast. Okay, so just to get into the topic of the day, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I was in Vegas, and if you guys heard my last podcast, you guys will know that, there was some spooky stuff that went on there. And if you want to learn more about it, click on the video there on the right. It should be there. If it's not, then go find it yourselves, sucker. No, just kidding. But yes, I do talk about a kind of a paranormal experience. It's pretty boring, to be honest, but it did happen. It was more of my friend's paranormal experience, and I talk about hotels and all that kind of stuff there. But in that video, I also talked about the movie The Shining, and that's kind of what inspired this video that I'm making today for you guys. Horror movies. I love horror movies, as you might have guessed, right? Because I am a horror narrator. Why not love horror movies as well? So I totally do love them. And I want to talk about a few things that make, in my opinion, what make horror movies popular. And in my opinion, why I love the horror movies that I really love. So I wrote down a few notes because this one's going to be more an informative video today for you guys. And I'm going to talk about it right now, actually. Just let me get my notes, bruh. Okay. So yes, I told you a story when I was in Vegas. I was in the hotel, and then my friend, before walking into the room, said that this scene reminded him of The Shining, which we watched together. And then I totally kind of freaked out on my friend because I was like, why are you saying that in like the middle of the night before we're about to get into our hotel room? Don't you know that's kind of like superstition or whatnot? And then, stuff like that. So it reminded me of The Shining, and it really got me thinking that I have to be honest, Shining is one of my favorite horror movies ever. And there's a few reasons why I think it's one of my favorite horror movies and why I think it's such a successful horror movie in general. And why horror movies succeed. And I wrote down a few notes that I feel is the reason why horror movies will succeed. It all has to do with unrealism versus realism. So what that is basically horror movies, when you watch them, you know that they aren't real. That's unrealism. You let yourself go when you walk into a movie theater. You walk in there, and then everything that's projected on screen, it's not real. That's why the most crazy shit can happen on screen. Like, if you watch, the Freddy movies or whatnot, they can slash teens and all that kind of stuff, and people will be okay with it. They won't vomit on the spot because there's a sense of unrealism in there. And that's always existed in all of horror movies. And why it's versus realism is because in past generations, up until recent generations, horror movies have gained a sense of realism, in my opinion. So horror movies have become more and more real. And why that is the case has to do with various factors. So let's talk about actually the reason why classic horror movies exist and why they are so popular. So what is the idea of horror? Horror Studio 1... Not Horror Studio, well, actually, yeah, Horror Studio 1 as well. Why I called myself Horror Studio 1. Not Horror Studio 1, Horror Studio 1. Again, I've been commented that I call myself Horror Studio 1. I am not a whore. Horror. Okay, Horror Studio 1. And why horror exists. It's basically the idea of the most successful horror movies or stories or stuff like that, it all has to deal with an idea of fear, and not exactly a monster that exists. If you watch the most classic horror movies, you'll always realize that the fear itself is more frightening than any monster. That's why, I mean, in my opinion, when I was a kid and I watched horror movies, the whole movie would be really friggin' scary. And then near the end, once they show the face of the monster, you kind of just lose all that suspense. Because it kind of kills it. Because the most intriguing part of any horror movie is the fact that you don't know what it is. And that's a very animalistic thing we have in human beings, and why we are driven and why we are attracted to that feeling is because as human beings, when we were living in caves, we were always afraid of the predator outside our cave door, and we were always afraid of that. What might that be? It could be a tiger, it could be a monster, it could be a dinosaur, it could be a rhino, it could be a giraffe, whatever, we don't know what it is, and that is what's freaky, and that's kind of the mentality and the psychology behind horror movies. We're afraid of what we don't know. So we are afraid of the idea of fear and not the monster itself. That's why most of the successful horror movies, I mean, unless you're talking about like Frankenstein or Dracula, that's a different era. But the ones I want to talk about are the ones that are more current to ourselves. The 60s, the 70s, the 80s. These horror movies, they have one thing in common. It's that the monster is never really shown, but it's kind of implied there, right? And sometimes it doesn't really make sense. Like, if you watch The Shining, you don't really get a lot of the scenes. You don't understand what's going on, but you just feel like there's something that's gonna happen. You feel like there's horror that's going on. You feel scared. You feel intimidated. You feel eerie, but you don't know why, right? I mean, just as the opening scene of The Shining, when Jack Nicholson is driving in the car along the mountain, and the shot is just panning, and there's this really like bizarre music playing in the background, like Stanley Kubrick, okay. That kind of music playing in the background and all that kind of stuff, you feel like there's something going on, but you don't know why you're scared, but you just feel like you are. You feel like something is, it's like a predator, It's kind of eyeing that car as it drives by the mountain, and that's what's freaky, It's not understanding. There's a quote here that actually someone wrote that I found really, that is really representative of the story, of the idea of horror, is that it's shutting yourself in with a maniac, right? You don't know this person. You don't know what the hell they're gonna do. That's why it's scary, because if you can predict a horror movie, if you know that there's gonna be a jump scare, if you know that this guy's gonna pop up, if you turn off the sound and then there's no suspense that is built, you're not gonna be afraid. And that's the success of a horror movie. You don't know what the hell is going to happen. That is the magnetic quality of The Shining, is that there are various scenes in that movie where, there's this one scene I really remember, and I Googled it, and I tried to find it on Wikipedia. I tried to find it on various forums of what it could be. It was the scene when Shelley Duvall is running up the stairs, and she's trying to find her son and husband, I think, and she's running up the stairs, and it's already really freaky. A lot of shit has already happened, and as she looks at the room across from her, she sees a man in a pig mask giving a blowjob to a guy, and then they just kind of both look up and turn their faces and look at her like shocked. And she's like, what the shit is that? Like, they're obviously not, they don't live there, right? Because her family is the only family. I mean, if you guys don't know The Shining, these guys are living as caretakers in this hotel, and they're the only people there. The wife, the husband, and the kid. So anyone else that's there is not going to be a human being. So she knows these aren't people, but what the hell are they doing? Like, they're not ghosts, like, oh, boo, like the ones with long hair, like The Ring, coming out to scare you from a TV or whatnot. They're these, people that are, I guess, spirits that live there, but they're just doing this crazy, was it a sexual act? Like, what was it supposed to be, Why was the guy having a mask on? Why was it two men? Like, were they in a homosexual relationship instead? Or was that guy like a prostitute, a gigolo, a horror studio? Like, you know what I mean? like that's the thing that's so intriguing about those old horror movies. Like you don't know what's going on, right? And another thing that I feel that every good horror movie needs to have is tension. Tension is made by pacing and by jump scares. In every horror movie, you have to have that buildup. You can't just have something simultaneously appear. Even in that scene I talked about with the pig mask, it was a lot of stuff going on. She was freaking out, and then she saw that scene of the man giving head to the other guy. That's what's frightening. I mean, if you take that out of context, it could be a comedic thing, right? You could put that in a Jim Carrey movie and work it just as well, but as a comedy, you know? And that's the thing about it's so absurd and it's insanity that's really the scary thing, right? And I guess that's kind of the whole theme of The Shining as well. You know, Jack is crazy. You know, he's fucking insane. Like you don't know if the ghosts are. I mean, you know they're spirits there, obviously, right? From the story itself, but sometimes. If you guys look in The Shining, the movie, every scene where Jack Nicholson apparently sees a ghost or something supernatural, there's always a mirror. So you don't know that if the things he's seeing are actually ghosts or actually just his own imagination. And that's what I love about old horror movies like The Shining as well. It's the symbolism, and it's really different from the future horror movies that we have today, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, which, I mean, I like them as well, but it's just a totally different style. Like, in the old horror movies like The Shining, I'm always going to go back to The Shining because it is my favorite horror movie. There was stuff like the maze, you know, the maze where, you know, Jack was chasing his son with his axe, and it's kind of like the human brain is there as well. And it's like, it's symbolic. It's symbolic for, the man being trapped inside his own mind, right? He's fucking lost. He's basically lost his mind, right? And that's a symbolic thing because the maze shows up various times in the film as well. In the beginning when he's just arrived, and at the end he's actually stuck inside the maze. So you can kind of say in the beginning he wasn't, you know, as crazy, but in the end he's totally fucking lost it, kind of thing. And there's various documentaries on that, Room 237, all that kind of stuff that talk about that kind of stuff. Some of the symbolism that they bring up is really, I guess, is it absurd? I don't know. Some of the stuff is a bit too, it's a bit too, like they try to read too much into it. And I think that's the thing with all kinds of writing. If it's good writing, and a lot of people try to interpret it, because everyone comes from a different upbringing, different background, they have different experiences in life. So every time they see an object, it's a subjective, it's objective. Object, subject. Anyway, it's very, like, they see it from their own viewpoint kind of thing. So you never really, you can overanalyze something a lot of times. But I think one symbol that everyone will agree on is the maze, and also the one that's really popular is the Native American symbolism, the massacre of the Native Americans in the film Shining, and how they talk about that and how it's hidden under the hotel grounds or whatnot, or the history is hidden. The massacre, the terrible things that have been done are hidden. And yeah, that's kind of why I was I actually thought about the topic of today when I was in Las Vegas in that hotel, actually, when I was, you know, trying to get to sleep, because it really reminded me of that, and it felt like I was in that film. Like, I'm not even sure if I can say that right. It just kind of felt like I was there. I know it's not the same hotel, but it just felt so alike. And, you know, because I went to the Grand Canyon and I went to a bunch of canyons where there's a lot of Native American, you know, paintings as well and symbols. So it really got me to think of that, and then it really got me to think about why I found that movie so frightening and why I'd find other movies so, frightening as well. So symbolism is really important, especially for older films. Even if you look at The Exorcist from the 1970s, yeah, it had a lot of shock value. You know, the girl's head was spinning, you know, she was barfing, she was floating in the air, she was cussing. Because basically back in the time, none of the films had that many swear words. It was like fuck kind of thing. You know what I mean? They swore more than me on this podcast, basically. And people were terrified. They were like vomiting. They were like outraged by the obscenities of that film, kind of thing. But besides just the shock value and the marketing value and the obvious ghost story kind of packaging that The Exorcist had back in the day, people say that it was talking about the mysteries of the Catholic faith, right? The Pazuzu, the demon that possesses the little girl, was a representation of the devil himself, you know, and questioning the faith of Catholics, you know, basically questioning the faith of God. Basically, that was the purpose of that film. Besides the fact that it was a story about possession, I think why those films stand so powerful is because they're trying to actually say something, which, I mean, it's a driving force to that film as well, right? If you just try to create a movie that scares the shit out of people, it can be a lot harder. I mean, from my perspective, because I screenwrite and I like to write. In my opinion, when I write a story, I want to make it have more meaning. So even if I do write, I have a line, like a thread or a line of direction to know where I'm going, basically. So, and that's actually very different from, the modern day horror films that we have, which I'm going to talk about for a bit as well. Because some of the more recent horror films, of course, there was a slasher horror films of the 80s, and there's obviously Asian horror films as well. Those ones I probably will talk about in a later podcast, but the thing I want to talk about today, because I talked about unrealism versus realism, is actually one film which is actually my other favorite horror film as well, and it really inspired me to do some filming of my own, I guess. It's actually called, you guys might know it, Blair Witch Project from 1999, and why I say, okay, before I start into that, I'm going to tell you guys why I say it inspired me to film. I probably will talk about this in a later podcast, but I'll just give you guys a bit of stuff. I have a video called My Werewolf Video. It was basically, I forget the name of the video actually. Shit. Give me one sec, guys. Confessions of a Teenage Werewolf? That sounds like a movie from the 80s. That's not my video. Where are you? Because no one views it. That's why I can't find it. Yeah, The Inner Monologue of a Confused Werewolf, creepypasta. So I wrote this myself. And it's basically a story about, you know what? I'll talk about it in a future podcast. But it's basically a story about a werewolf who gets gunned down, basically. But why I wanted to talk about this one specifically was because it was inspired to me by the Blair Witch Project. Because if you guys do view it, if you guys watch it, I do a little filming of my own, and I'm basically filming somewhere near my backyard kind of thing. And yeah, I do the whole Blair Witch kind of thing. And yeah, I'll tell you guys why Blair Witch is so important. Well, you guys will know that the Blair Witch Project, when it came out in the late 90s, they marketed the film very successfully. It was the most successful indie film, I think, or the most successful, gained the most profit for any film, despite its budget and stuff, ever, because it was marketed so brilliantly. They basically said that it was a lost footage found in the forest by these young people. And people bought it, and they used the internet. It was the very, beginning of the internet, when people were like, what is, Internet Explorer? And you still had to wait, 30 minutes to get online kind of thing. And they marketed the film like that. And they said there was lost footage, and people bought it, and they sold so many tickets at the movie theaters. And yeah, it was a great film for that. And the reason I thought it was kind of like a revolution in the whole horror film genre was because it kind of really started this thing about simplicity, back when you watch The Shining compared to the Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project started a phase of realism. Like, people actually bought that it was real, and that's kind of why people started to like more real videos. They liked things that were real as opposed to unreal. And that's kind of like the shift. You can actually see that as the whole trend, right? People start to like reality TV, People start to like things that, they went online to the deep web to look for things that were really gross, real people dying. People start to like that kind of stuff. And I think Blair Witch Project was really symbolic for people who liked it. It really showed everyone that was the trend. Like, that was the thing that was in, real stuff. So that's why I thought it was really important. And of course, it was super scary as well. The one-person view and all that kind of stuff, and that kind of transpired into a Paranormal Activity as well in the 2000s, where, they use a one camera, or they use a surveillance camera, and that's the whole movie. I mean, back in the 60s, people would have said, what the hell is this, right? But, in the 2000s, it's become so crazy, so popular kind of thing. So that's kind of why I feel it's that realism right there. So yeah, Paranormal Activity, the Blair Witch Project. Yeah. realism right there, as opposed to the unrealism of the past. Because the theory of the newer films, I think, has two elements that make it really successful, and it's a really good formula as well. It's if you mix simplicity with a deep message. So what I was saying about simplicity was just the fact that the plot itself and what was going on always had to be simple, right? If you look at the Blair Witch Project, the person has a camera and they're walking through a forest trying to find a witch, or they're trying to shoot a documentary. Basically, that is the story. But the deep message I was talking about was that the story behind it was actually very disturbing, right? They talk about the witch and that there was a man that killed children and made the children turn around to face the wall, and then he would kill them, kind of thing. That was the message. Same with Paranormal Activity. It was basically had the story about the house, the house and the stuff in the house moving, but the message behind that had a really deep backstory, a really disturbing backstory. And that's kind of like a contrast to the ones in the past where it had a really great, a really complex story with a lot of symbolism, like in The Shining. But now in the future, now it's basically just simple stuff, straightforward. But if you look deep into it, it's friggin' scary kind of thing. But I think that trend for the kind of the realism has kind of faded in recent years. I think we've had too much of that, in my opinion. So if you look at the films like the Insidious series, it has a much deeper backstory as well. It's still symbolic and a little less so it's still simple and a little less symbolic, but it does try to, I think, capture the past feelings kind of a bit more, I think. Because when I watch the Insidious movies, I kind of feel like I'm watching like films like The Shining and The Ring and stuff like that, as opposed to, Paranormal Activity. And I think that's kind of how the horror trend will be going in the future. So, yeah, unrealism versus realism. So for any successful horror film, I always feel, though, is if you don't understand it. That's basically horror. That's what's scary. And I guess that's what's scary about my videos as well, If you look at my videos, my most scary ones, it's the ones that you don't know what the hell is going on, right? Like, I have this one story I actually want to talk about. It's my story on the wooden people. I don't know how many of you have heard that story, but it's basically my 23 true ghost story video. And on my second story, a lot of you guys have commented on that story. It's about wooden people. And I didn't know. I know. I hope the story is real. I found it on an online forum, and it's, Rod and Todd, and people keep saying they're from The Simpsons. Did I get trolled? No, I'm kidding. But no, Rod and Todd, they're going through the forest, and then they meet this couple of wooden people living in a wooden house. So basically, it's a real forest, but inside it's like this movie set that's been built with wooden figures and a wooden, backdrop, a wooden setting kind of thing, a wooden house. And they're freaked out and they don't know what the hell is going on, and they run away. That to me was really terrifying because it felt like something that could have existed in The Shining, or something existed in those kind of horror movies. It's just that, why? Like, what kind of thing? That's what's really scary in my opinion. And a lot of you guys didn't like it. You guys thought it was really fake. But in my opinion, that's what true horror is. What the fuck? What's going on? That is true horror. Shutting yourself in with a maniac. That is true horror. So thank you guys for shutting yourselves in with Horror Studio 1 today. I hope I scared you, or at least entertained you for 20 minutes or something like that. So yeah, those are just some of my takes on my favorite horror movies and why horror movies are successful and why they prosper and what makes a good horror movie in the opinion of Horror Studio 1. I am by no way an authority, but I am just a fan who loves to talk, basically. Yep, that is my take, guys, and I really miss talking to you guys, man. But as well, a lot of you guys have been saying my videos have been too long and I BS too much, I guess. So yeah, I guess I'm just gonna end it there. So thank you for tuning in today once again, Horror Studio 1. I hope to have more amazing content for every single one of you. And yeah, hope to talk to you guys soon. Horror Studio 1 out.